Arkin rolled his eyes and made a mental note of the order he was going to have to do this, and how many he would be able to pick off before he was in a running battle through the woods. He watched the orcs watching them creeping into position for the easy kill. He pulled his gaze from the wider camp at large back to the two warriors. A part of him wanted to focus on doing this tactically, and for the smallest fraction of a second, he considered letting them fend for themselves. It wasn't that he was incapable of making cold, calculating decisions to better his chances of success. It was just that he agreed to group with them, so for better or worse, they were in his care. As the orcs grinned wickedly and raised their fur-handled axes up for the kill blow, Arkin hesitated for a split second, hoping he wouldn't have to fire, and held out for the possibility that they'd notice the ambush on their own. When the orcs took a step forward, the gunslinger fired. The bullet spun in slow motion, striking the lead orc in the head. The other two orcs blew their shot at the quick kill, but pushed on all the same. The two warriors were on equal footing now, 2 versus 2. So he whirled back to the raiding party and watched a goblin arrow sink into the bark of the tree, a foot from his face. Arkin blazed a long rifle shot at the goblin, who was savvy enough to have found him, and caved his little chest in with the force of the blast. He flipped his rifle over his shoulder like a baton, and it was magnetically clamped onto his back. He slid down the tree like it was encased in ice, rolling away from branches too big to break and slowing himself with branches too little to sustain his weight. Once he hit the ground, his hands disappeared behind his back and reappeared with dual pistols. The entire raiding party bore down on him faster than he could potentially flee through trap-laden terrain. He swiftly backed up, coat swaying in the wind, and began to deal death by the dozens. His pistol screamed and the goblins rushed his position. He was brilliant in his execution and didn't miss a single target he aimed for, but as one goblin dropped, another took its place. In only seconds' time, the goblins began taking cover, realizing they were not the tip of the spear in this assault. They were the support. The little creatures laid down, crept behind the bushes and rocks, while the stronger, more aggressive orcs took to the forefront. Arkin hit them too with an unwavering precision, but one bullet didn't guarantee one kill with the massive size of these warriors. The pistol in his left hand clicked empty, and he pushed the barrel into the wheel on his back. The contraption started its work and rapidly unscrewed the barrel. The wheel spun, and another barrel twisted itself onto his pistol. His chamber fell away, and the device screwed in new bullets, all within seconds of time. While his contraption did its work, he fired at 4 charging orcs, dropping 2 with 4 shots. He pushed his right hand to his back and started the reloading process, and rose his left hand with his fully rearmed weapon. One of the orcs grabbed his arm. He tried to pull away, but the beast had a firm grip on him. It was only seconds before his reloader finished, but that was a second too long. The orc raised his war axe while the other one held him. As the kill blow's final arc descended, an arrow split through the brush and winged it on its shoulder, giving Arkin the fraction of a second pause he needed to finish the reloading process of his right-handed pistol. He folded his arms and shot under his left, dropping the orc that held him with a massive onslaught to the gut, then rolled back to avoid that orc that hounded him with the axe. From his prone position, he quickly scooted back on his elbow as the orc chopped at him. He rolled from side to side as he could see the other orcs closing in. When the last of the 4 orcs' axe fell and dug into the dirt, he rolled over it, taking it from his hand. The orc eased in closer to pull his weapon free and was struck with a bullet to the head that put him to sleep for all time. Arkin scrambled to his feet as he did a goblin arrow bit into his calf. He looked at the back of the ranks in horror as he saw an ogre bumbling through the brush. A gigantic creature, 10 feet tall with muscles like tree trunks and brains like walnuts. Arkin hobbled back as the orcs and goblins rushed in. He wasn't going to be able to run with his injury. He was outnumbered, yes, but he was not outgunned. He spun behind a tree as a volley of goblin arrows planted themselves in the bark, missing him completely. A trail of goblin arrows followed him. He had by no means finished his assessment of the camp before his stealth was blown. But from the looks of it, they had double the number that he had estimated from first glance. After seconds of attack and piles of bodies, the raiders realized the type of threat they were dealing with, and instead of straightforward combat, the goblins hid and the orcs strategically spread out, taking to the deeper forest, hoping to acquire Arkin from an unexpected angle, minimizing their chances of catching a stray bullet. The ogre, on the other hand, was either extremely stupid or so extremely confident in his massive size that he barreled forward with little regard for pain. Arkin began to slow down to pick his shots now that his targets began to scatter. It was no longer the same battlefield after only 15 seconds of mayhem. He blasted the ogre, half his bullets stuck into his massive club, and the few that did manage to strike home were mitigated slightly by his size. He rode from tree to tree, ducking the flight of goblin arrows. As the orcs managed to close in and he was surrounded by the misshapen warriors, his hands worked in a blur, reaping death. The ogre reached him through the vast camp and endeavored to smash him into oblivion. As the massive ogre exaggeratedly prepared for his swing, a man appeared directly in his face, as if created from the nothingness. The rampaging beast prioritized this mystery human in front of him, and half a tree trunk slammed down on him. The club passed through the image as if it were not quite real, and the weapon pounded dirt. Before it could stop to be confused, Candel appeared from nowhere and dropped over the brute's head. He slammed his sword into the thing's collarbone. All the goblins, waiting for an opening, instantly took it. Their arrows cut air towards the high shoulders of the ogre. Their strikes passed the threshold from potential danger to certain doom, and destiny decided Candel was hit. But inexplicably, the wooden shafts blew away in a gust of wind. The dwarf, Ebo, emerged from the tree line with his hand outstretched. He commanded the elements with his will and the approval of the nameless god. Ebo decided that the winds were his and nothing so mundane as an arrow would pass through. Arkin smirked hard and continued his dance of death, spinning and swirling, pushing away the fog of gun smoke. Orcish axes fell in his direction, but bullets moved faster. Arkin crossed his arms into X's, fired, rolled, reloaded, and repeat until the orcs were memories. Candel waited for the ogre to attempt to pull him from his back. As the massive hand reached back, his echo manifested in front of the brute. He willed himself to be his manifestation, and his perspective flipped. He was where he willed himself to be, and his echo was where he was. The ogre smacked Candel's mirage like an insect, and it disappeared, but not before Candel used that split second of distraction to powerfully pirouette into his spin and drive his sword into the thing's gut. The ogre dropped to his knees, no longer strong enough to hold on to his fading existence. He made a booming shockwave when he tumbled. The goblins yelped and screamed, knowing if their strongest ally was felled so easily, they had no chance. Ebo wasted no time. He didn't give these little menaces quarter. With a flick of his hand, the dwarf manifested a ball of light that dropped out of the sky as if a piece of the sun broke away. The ball of fire and brightness erupted here and there, sending out gouts of flame towards anything in its path. Ebo took a step back when a residual gout of fire leapt from the massive orb his direction. The goblins fled as best as they could, all the while a chaotic mass of bright death spun after them. Arkin looked over to his friend and smiled. Ebo picked himself up from the dirt and walked over to Arkin with his arms extended to hug. The aloof dog soldier put away his dual pistols. As soon as Arkin was about to receive the embrace, Ebo ducked low and yanked the goblin arrow out of his calf. Arkin roared in anger and surprise, but before he had words, the dwarf said in whispers a prayer to the nameless god that he, in essence, made up just to enact his spell. Brilliant light cupped into Ebo's hand, and he patched the wound, filling it with whatever Arkin's body needed to become whole again. "You couldn't have just asked me to sit still," Arkin said. "I could have, but that was quicker," Ebo shot back. "I noticed your spell nearly burned you. Was it supposed to do that?" Arkin asked the dwarf. I guess my spells become more and more unpredictable. The better ones I ask for, the more chance that something I don't plan for happens. Which one of you shot the arrow and saved my ass? Arkin spoke plainly so that he'd know who he was supposed to thank. That be me, said the voice of a female half-elf who slid down a tree. Good shot, Arkin praised. The half-elf woman nodded but didn't respond. Before Arkin could stop to ask, the two human warriors that caused the chain reaction emerged with swords drawn. Where were you two? Arkin asked evenly, without judgment or true concern. We were just taking out these two orcs, said one. Were you? Arkin said, standing amidst a pile of bodies. Where did all the goblins go? One of the human warriors said while following the trail of gore and destruction in disbelief it was already over. Why don't you two go and tell the driver we're on our way out and grab a few goblin corpses before you leave? Arkin spoke as if he were in charge. No one disputed that. What's your name, half-elf? Arkin asked. Alune, she whispered back with a half-curtsy. Well, Alune, tell your traveling companions you three can claim the reward for this bounty. Why? Alune asked, not figuring Arkin was a generous mercenary. I think you will need the money to get started more than me. Besides, I have my traveling companions now, Arkin said, facing Ebo and Candale. I know you didn't come all this way to say no, Arkin confidently addressed his friends. We came to talk at least, Candale corrected. Nah, we're going, Ebo said, correcting the corrector. Arkin walked over to the ogre and removed a dirty coin pouch. There were a few gold inside. He took his share out and tossed the rest to Alune. Split it with the others, Arkin said while walking away and igniting a spark to bring his cigarette to life. So, where do you have a mind to go, Arkin? Ebo asked his old friend. I don't rightly know. All I know is the tremors came from Central Temporis, Arkin said. And we should find Kip Cracklin first, Ebo spoke confidently. You think he'd know what's happening? Arkin asked. He is the best living seeker there is at the moment. If he doesn't know, then we may as well just wait for the tremors and follow them, Ebo explained. So how exactly are we going to get through the blockade? Said Ebo. Blockade? Candale asked. Yeah, the blockade, Arkin said, as if it was so common knowledge he shouldn't have to explain it. You really don't pay attention to anything but the forge. Gramblin Maddox's forces have surrounded Lorelei and held them at bay for the past 6 months, so Keen is surrounded, Arkin added. Then how did you get through? Candale asked Arkin. I got a smuggler to get me through on a boat on the Echo River. I don't know exactly where my ride might have went, so we'll either have to sneak through Maddox's ranks on foot or get passage on a friendly ship, Arkin explained. Maybe I could help with that, Alune chimed in. The three men turned. The half-elf was so quiet up until this point that they had assumed she had moved on. I know a few people in the criminal underground of Keene that smuggle on the Echo River. I may be able to hook us up with people that could help. Hold on there, darling. What's all this we business? Arkin said. Oh, if I can get you out of Keene and punch through Maddox's forces, I'm part of the group, Alune said, as if it were obvious. Candale squinted his eyes in thought and mild curiosity. Why? What's in it for you? We are seekers on a quest to uncover the face of the faceless god. There is no coin in it for you. I disagree. You are the best traveling companions to have because you don't care about money. I can see you're capable, and I can see that you'll leave money on the table out of principle, money that you wouldn't care if I scooped up. The three old friends looked at each other, and technically speaking, she was correct. They did partake in the spoils of an adventurer's life, but they by no means were blinded by the glint of gold. If she did have in mind to acquire, she would do it easily in this group, with little chance of deadly disputes, in the case of money at least.
She saved my life, so I'm okay with it,
Arkin said.
She seems like a delight. Besides, a female perspective may add a touch of class to this operation,
Ebo said with a smile while rubbing his half-beard in thoughtful contemplation. The two looked to Candale to see if he had anything to say. The thick-armed human was silent, but he sparked to life unexpectedly as if he had thought of something. Can you handle yourself in battle? Well, enough to run if I can't, Alune said with confidence. Candale made no expression, big or small. He just looked back to the other two and nodded. You're in, Arkin said with a knowing nod. Alune smiled, knowing this would be a decision she would not regret. Whether it laid her to riches or to ruin, she knew it was going to be a journey worth taking. Do not despair, it is I, Atarai. This chapter of the story concludes, but we ain't done. For you see, there are at least 4 other chapters to this very story in question. They all are wrote. I'll bring 'em out when I bring 'em out. You deal with it. So, from the planet of Everin to the continent of Temporis, we are out of here like last year.